I've been looking into peacemaking, ways of reconciliation. And
Right.
reconciliation, of course, is also personal. You reconciling yourself to a body that didn't do what it had done for, 30 years? Or no, about 27. Were you 27 when this happened? When you had your accident?
23.
You were only 23?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
This is 1982.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Oh, you were so young. I
Yeah, I just
hadn't
got off a
remembered.
mission. So I
Yeah,
got off my mission at 21.
I
And
hadn't
so this
remembered that
is,
you were so young. But yeah, because that actually, that's 23 years. So you have to reconcile yourself with what's going to be.
yes.
One of the films that I've seen recently is called Beyond Right and Wrong, where it talks about people who have had their children killed. One is a Rwandan woman
Yeah.
who learns to make peace with the man who murdered her children, which is
Oh,
almost unthinkable. But
right.
it's, the whole thing is to restore humanity, to quit objectifying.
Yeah, how do you drink the bitter cup without becoming bitter is such a challenge.
I don't know
that's
that there's a recipe for that.
the movie Groundhog Day addresses this a little bit. There's a scene in there where Bill Murray is talking to his love interest, Andy McDowell. And they're at a restaurant. He goes, I'm cursed. Every day I wake up and it's the same day, the same damn day, over and over. And this is hell. And she looks at him and she says, what if it's a blessing? What if it's not a curse, but a blessing? And that reframing helps him to begin to see outside of himself. So, okay, I'm stuck in this day, or I'm stuck in this body. What can I do with what I have? And so for him, he gets out of it by looking outside of himself. How can I serve others? What things can I do? How can I help others? And that really helps him break out. But for me, that was also a question: what can I do with what I have? How do I make the most of what I have? And if I can spend time doing those things, then I'm not spending so much time thinking, "Oh, woe is me." Here, here I am. And although this is tough, that you can always say, "Well, you're not hurt near as bad as a lot of other people."
Which is
But I think
one of the worst things to say to somebody who's going
so,
through.
right,
Where was it? Somebody was telling me, maybe it was mom mentioning that it was, of course, hard to be a widow, hard to miss dad, and the woman said, "Well, you're lucky. I lost my husband when I was 63." So it's
right.
kind of like, well, yeah. I'm sorry. I am lucky, even though this is a really lonely
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, whatever. And Frankel addresses that. He said, whatever suffering you're going through, it feels like it's more than you can bear. And my suffering was nothing like Auschwitz, or nothing like somebody who's, a quadriplegic for the rest of their life, whatever that is. But it's still, for me, that was everything. He used the example of a gas chamber. If it's at 3, that still feels horrible. It's nothing like it would be at 10. But 4 or 5, and to look at the number 3 and say, oh, you're really not suffering because you're just at 3. For that person, they're really suffering.
Yeah.
I would say this would be with my kids. There are times that they're growing up and they come home and they're crying, oh, my friend did this or that, and you're thinking, oh, that's nothing. Wait till you're big. But you don't say that. You say, yeah, for where you're at right now, this is really hard. This really hurts.
And that is a law of humanity, I think, empathy, although many of us don't attain it. But I would say that's, if we can become empathetic by the end of our lives, we've accomplished a great thing.
And there's a difference between empathy and sympathy. So empathy is being with someone.
Yeah.
Versus sympathy is, and sympathy or empathy never begins with, at least you.
Right. At least you didn't have to go through what I went through.
Right.
It's not a competition.
Yeah, and I would say an example, I think, of really good empathy is when Dad died. I've just gotten this phone call. I'm probably still on the phone, and it's in the morning, and, I walk into our bedroom, my wife's in bed, and she can just see this is a tough call. And she just, just says, here, do you want me to just hold you?
Oh,
And so it's like, you can't say anything with words.
No.
But you see this really tough situation, and it's like, okay, here's what I can be there with you, rather than trying to, well, at least he lived to be this. That's just not helpful.
and there are so many lines that are not helpful. But yeah, the hugs, just stating in however way, I'm with you. What would you want anybody who is struggling to get back their lives? Whether I have a friend whose daughter took her life, and my friend has she started a whole organization to prevent suicide, and it's magnificent, but it's still excruciatingly painful to have lost her daughter. I know many recovering addicts, and unfortunately, I just had a friend who was doing beautifully, who just overdosed. She survived, but lost her kids in the, the kids she will not be able to be with the kids for a while. So obviously the cliches are not going to work.
One of my favorite stories, I think I've told you about this Native American woman who has a baby, and the baby dies. And the pain is so excruciating that she can't accept it. And so she ties the baby on her back, and she goes through a village, and she knocks on all of her neighbors' doors, and she says, my baby's asleep and I can't wake her up. They look at the baby and they see the baby's dead, and there's nothing that they can do. They're trying to be helpful, so they send her on to the next house. And the same thing happens at the next house, and they look at the baby and they say, no, I can't help you, and send her on. And finally they send her on to the wise man on the mountain. And so she hikes up this difficult hike, and finally she gets to his house and knocks on the door, and he meets with her and talks to her, and she says, can you help me wake my baby? And he says, I may be able to, but we'll take some work from you. In order for me to wake the baby, I need some mustard seed. I need mustard seed from each of your neighbors in the village. And if you'll bring me that mustard seed, we may be able to use it to wake the baby. So she's excited. There's at least some hope. And she goes, yes, I'll do it. And as she goes down to do it, he says, but there's one other thing. You can only take the mustard seed from families who have not experienced death. So she goes back and asks for the mustard seed, and all of her neighbors are just like, sure, I'll get you this. But as she goes, but I can only accept it if you've never experienced death. And as she says that, they all go, I'm sorry. My mother, my son, whatever, all of them had experienced death. But as she goes through this process, she realizes that she's not alone. With that realization, she can finally accept that her baby has died. And so suffering is central to the human existence at different levels. But I think that's one of the helpful things for me, is that I'm not alone in suffering. That suffering is a universal, maybe the most universal experience. And something I wrote in a paper once, let me see if I can recollect. I go back to Star Wars first, and one of the lines in Star Wars is, fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hatred. And hatred leads to suffering. And I was reading something by Deepak Chopra that I liked, and he said, this may be the case. Maybe it is that fear leads to anger, anger leads to hatred, hatred leads to suffering. But if suffering can be seen as something universal, and suffering can lead to compassion, compassion leads to love. And love leads to healing.
Beautiful. Oh, I love that.
So it's a different path. So rather than being angry to say, okay, I'm not alone in that. How can I act compassionately towards others? What things can I share with them? And that really is, I think, compassion is what we need. And as we show compassion, that leads to love, and love leads to healing. And love is a power, I think, the most powerful thing that we have, a power unmatched by hatred.
I'm thinking of Alcoholics Anonymous and other groups like it, where one of my dear friends who could even be related to me
Right.
was in AA, and there's a step where it's take a fearless inventory of your life and confess to somebody the things that you've done and how you've hurt people. And that's a huge step. When he wanted to find a sponsor,
Yeah.
sponsors are included in Alcoholics Anonymous, and finally went to a guy, and the guy started crying and said, I've been praying that somebody would ask me to be a sponsor. I'm ready to serve. And this person did the full step, had made a full inventory, confessed all of it. That's sort of like just cleaning out that old life so that you can
Yes.
claim the future life. And the guy, the person thought that he would now be viewed as just such a wicked, evil person for all of the things he had done. But the sponsor said, I am so honored that you would trust me with all of this. And now we work towards the future.
Yeah. And I felt that way many times doing psychotherapy, that it's like I'm honored that you would share these sacred,
Yeah.
sort of a sacred trust.
Sacred secrets.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to do that inventory. But you could also do an inventory. Could you make an inventory of people that you've helped?
That's a brilliant. Do you do that in your classes? Have you had people make an inventory of people they've helped?
No, I have not.
I think that's a brilliant idea.
I ran into a friend just at the bank one day, and he's more of an acquaintance than a friend. And I just said, how are you? And he looked at me and said, I'm blessed. And I thought, that's a great response, because sometimes I think, oh, I'm cursed. I have to deal with this and this. But, to reframe things and say, I'm really blessed. That's a nice way of looking at life. I was reading something the other day. This was Deepak Chopra, and he said, if you want something, give it away, because what you give is what you will receive. And I think this is even personally, that if I think maybe the most important relationship you have is with yourself, and you deserve kindness, and you deserve consideration, and you deserve compassion. And to show that to yourself, but if you're struggling with that, show it to others. And as you show that to others, it will come and it will manifest in your life.